Instructional design is a process by which theory and practical methods contribute to developing quality instructional practices. In a teaching context, instructional design creates a learning environment and conditions which are required for optimal learning experiences. There are a variety of models which instructional designers use, such as the Dick and Carey model, instructional systems design, ADDIE model, transactional distance, just to name a few. However, for the purpose of this paper, the focus will be on the ADDIE model. This paper will compare views of researchers regarding the ADDIE model. It will outline the strengths and limitations of the model and will critique its effectiveness for the future use in instructional design. ADDIE is an acronym for the stages of the model: analysis, design, development, implementation, and evaluation. ADDIE is a widely known model in the field of instructional design. Although instructional design became mainstream in the 1950s, it wasn't until 25 years later that ADDIE was introduced as a possible model. It was developed by the United States Army by the Center of Educational Technology at Florida State University. This model has been derived from trying to restructure a previous model known as the 5 steps approach, which was less structured than ADDIE. Although it took a quarter of a century after the origination of instructional design for ADDIE to be developed, the model is still widely used today. It may have been derived in the USA, but it is now used all over the world for a variety of contexts. It is not only used to design new programs, but it is also used to restructure existing programs that no longer meet the needs of the learners or the context. As previously mentioned, the ADDIE model consists of 5 stages. The first stage is the analysis phase. Within this stage, the instructional problem is identified and goals are set. A focus needs to be outlined so it sets the direction for the rest of the process. Also, learner characteristics are studied so that the instructional designer is aware of the skill set they already encompass. The instructional designer will be able to make a plan to bridge the gap between what students currently know and what they need to know by the end of the process. The second stage is the design phase. This stage outlines instructional strategies and materials that have been created based on the learner profiles created from the previous phase. During this stage, the focus is on learning objectives, lesson planning, assessment methods, and content. Kurt adds that attention to detail is very important during this phase, and a significant amount of time should be spent fine-tuning this stage. The third stage is development. The difference between this stage and the previous one is that during the design stage, the learning content is being planned. In this stage, the learning content is being built. The program is being created at this point, and plans are becoming concrete. The analysis and design. Davis and Bates agree that spending time on the earlier phases of ADDIE are highly beneficial to the success of the program in the end. Investing the time into analyzing your learners' characteristics and designing the process will result in fewer modifications, which can be costly, and a stronger program in all. Bates delves deeper to discuss the breakdown of the budget by each stage. He states that the analysis phase should consume about 10% of the budget, and the design phase about 36% of the budget, the development phase 35% of the budget, and the implementation phase 4%, whereas the evaluation phase 7%. It is important to know that although analysis, implementation, and evaluation only use about 21% of the budget, this is not because they're less important than the other stages. It is merely that the resources required for these stages are not near as costly as the others. Much of the work that goes into these three phases is in the form of time by the instructional designer, whereas the design and development phases are more costly because they require resources and technology which can be very expensive. Also worth noting, the design and development phase often involve formative evaluation, which may mean certain parts of the process are being redesigned and restructured, which is also costly. As in most budgets, there is room for flexibility, which is why Bates did not account for the full 100% of the budget in this diagram. ADDIE can be used in a variety of settings, such as the traditional classroom, online courses, blended learning, and corporate training. There's a wide range of research which supports instructional design in an educational setting. Baldwin explains how teaching and instructional design are so closely linked because most educators are directly involved in the development and teaching of their courses. Davis states that a national survey of 10,700 college and university faculty instructors found that over 80% of faculty involved in online teaching and/or development are involved in both the development and the teaching aspects for a given course. Therefore, it would make sense for educators of all levels to have some formal training in the field of instructional design. Modern teaching has evolved significantly from the methods used in traditional teaching, the most obvious evolution being the switch from teacher-centered classrooms to student-centered classrooms. Teaching is very much individualized in that learner characteristics guide the way educators teach rather than the learners conforming to how the teacher is teaching. At the heart of ADDIE is the learners. It is the very first step of the model and it guides how the rest of the program is designed. Analyzing learner characteristics will allow the designer or educator to reach each learner and challenge them at an optimal level. Peterson points out that the ADDIE model employs a learner-centered approach and that all further steps require the instructional designer to draw on the conclusions made about those learner skills. Taking a learner-centered approach to designing and learning is highly effective, since you are altering the lesson to meet the needs of the learners. As an instructional designer is making their decision regarding which model to use for their process, they must consider their own comfortability with particular models, as well as the benefits and limitations for each model, and how it may fit into that particular context. One of the most notable benefits of the ADDIE model is that it is widely used and is known to create programs with clear objectives, structured content, and activities that are user-friendly for all stakeholders. The fact that ADDIE is strongly linked to learner outcomes is a desirable qualification for educators looking into instructional design models. Bates also points out that although these design principles can be conducted without using the ADDIE model, ADDIE ensures that they are followed specifically and thoroughly in the process of design. Another benefit of ADDIE is that it is user-friendly for beginners. It essentially simplifies more complex models such as the Dick and Carey model and creates a more linear approach to the design process. This can be appealing to a beginner in instructional design as they attempt to navigate their way through the process for the first time. It also makes the process of instructional design attainable for those who have a high level of knowledge regarding the content, but not much knowledge in formal design. Now, I just listed ADDIE being linear as a benefit, but you'll later hear that it is also kind of a limitation for particular designers. Unlike Bates, Kurt, and Baldwin, Bickelmeyer is fairly critical of the ADDIE model and the reputation it has in the world of research. Bickelmeyer states that the great strength of the ADDIE model is implied in the title we give it. The acronym title creates a straightforward 5-step process to design which was not found in more complex models. Also, Bickelmeyer insinuates that one of the only benefits ADDIE has is that it is widely known. Therefore, people tend to trust it as an effective model. Bickelmeyer continues on with a significant list of limitations, some of which are also briefly addressed by Bates. One such limitation is that the model can be very time-consuming, as the analysis, design, and development phase take a considerable amount of time, as learners are examined, content is sorted, and instruction is carefully planned. Also, with a time-consuming project also comes high costs, which is another limitation that must be taken into consideration. The attention to detail can be meticulous, but if the process is completed thoroughly, the final product will be effective and successful. An example of this is the redesign of a general chemistry course using ADDIE, which took over 1,000 man-hours and approximately 18 months for a team of 6 professionals to complete. Although this redesign was very time-consuming and tedious, the outcome resulted in a significantly increased GPA for the course and a decreased failure rate. However, the instructor needs to decide whether the cost-benefit ratio is worth the potential outcome, as they take into consideration the cost of time and money throughout the duration of the process. Although stated above as a benefit, another limitation of ADDIE is that it is linear. The criticism with this point is that although it may be appealing for beginners, for experienced instructional designers, the ADDIE model can feel simplified and inflexible. It is argued that the process needs to have more reflection and evaluation throughout the process, rather than wait until the ending phases, the implementation and evaluation phases, as outlined in ADDIE. Also identified by Bates is the fact that the inflexibility of ADDIE also pertains to the rapidly developing digital age. In most programs, technology is incorporated, and because ADDIE is a linear model, it doesn't account for the possible need to alter a part of the process due to that developing technology. Bickelmeyer points out that although ADDIE is criticized by some researchers, it is still widely popular as a design model. This may be partly because it simplifies some of the more complex models and is easy for beginners to understand and use. Bickelmeyer goes on to further explain how ADDIE is not even a model, it is merely a conceptual framework. She states that the idea of instructional design is so broad, putting the legitimacy of the field in jeopardy because so many concepts are being thrown into the broad realm of instructional design. She states that the core focus on instructional design is uncertain, and therefore it is being inundated by other fields. In this inundation, she goes on to explain how ADDIE should never have been described as a model since it does not accurately depict what instructional designers truly do. She states that although there is confusion around what instructional design encompasses and the boundaries within the field, it is without question that ADDIE is and always has been a founding framework within the field and is a good general starting point, but should not be considered a model to be followed. Although Bates seems slightly more accepting of the model than Bickelmeyer, Bates suggests that ADDIE has served its purpose as a model for the foundation of instructional design, but because of its limitations regarding inflexibility, it may not be best suited for contexts which are quickly evolving, such as education. Answering the question of whether ADDIE is an effective instructional design model is complex, because first it needs to be determined whether ADDIE is in fact a model or merely a conceptual framework, as Bickelmeyer suggests. Second, the word effective can be subjective and is highly dependent on the person you are asking. For the purpose of this paper, it has been noticed that although ADDIE has many benefits and serves the purpose of instructional design, it is also apparent that there are many limitations of the model. Although other models have not been critiqued within the depth of this purpose, it would be expected that some of the limitations of the ADDIE model, such as being time-consuming and expensive, would also be limitations of other models. Although one needs to be careful in taking the opinion of one researcher too dearly, the concerns of ADDIE outlined by Bickelmeyer cannot be overlooked. Compared to Bates, Davis, or Kurt, the conclusions were a bit more rigid when described by Bickelmeyer. Many of her concerns, such as the model being too linear and rigid, were also identified by other researchers, such as Bates. According to many modern researchers, ADDIE is a useful model for instructional design, but it would be best used as a broad guideline for beginners rather than a strict model used thoroughly.